At first glance, it might seem contradictory. How can a man who is committed to semen retention, self-control, and higher consciousness face more temptation than before? The truth lies in the fundamental law of polarity. The moment a man decides to retain, to preserve his vital energy, he's not just shifting his lifestyle, he's shifting his energetic frequency. And the universe, by its very design, begins to challenge that new frequency. Every energetic upgrade invites a series of tests. These tests aren't punishments. They are confirmations, opportunities to solidify a man's inner strength. When a man retains his sexual energy, which is the raw creative life force, is no longer being depleted or externalized. Instead, it begins to rise. This upward movement energizes the chakras, enhances magnetism, and sharpens awareness. But it also lights a fire. That fire attracts attention, not only from people, especially women, but also from subtle energies and emotional triggers that seek to pull the man back into old patterns. What he once craved physically now returns as a mental temptation, more vivid and intense than before. It's crucial to understand that temptation intensifies not because the man is weak, but because his aura is becoming stronger. Darkness is drawn to light, not the other way around. The moment a man starts glowing with the light of self-restraint, all that has been lurking in the shadows, repressed desires, subconscious wounds, karmic imprints, start surfacing. Temptation is the echo of those parts trying to find resolution, not domination. This is why spiritual texts and traditions across cultures have always warned seekers about the test of the senses. Whether it's in yogic practices, Buddhist monastic discipline, or Taoist inner alchemy, the journey always includes a phase where temptations become louder before they fade. These aren't just outer distractions. They are inner reflections of unresolved energies that still need integration. Therefore, the retained man must not confuse temptation with failure. He must view it as a mirror. Each moment of temptation is a signal that something within him is being purified. The seduction is not in the woman, the screen, or the thought. It's in the mind's habit of escaping discomfort through pleasure. The journey of retention is, at its core, a purification of perception. Amplification of desire. Through energy accumulation. One of the least talked about effects of semen retention is the amplification of desire. Not just sexual desire, but the desire to experience, to achieve, to create. The seed that is being retained is a reservoir of divine potential, and when it is not released outward, it does not simply disappear. It amplifies. It magnifies everything it touches. So if a man is still mentally tied to lust, the very energy he's trying to transmute will intensify those lustful visions until he addresses them. The body is intelligent. It knows that this retained essence is meant for something, and when it doesn't find higher direction, art, purpose, meditation, service, it flows toward the lower habitual channels, fantasy, cravings, emotional entanglements. That's why some men on retention report more vivid dreams, stronger urges, and even spontaneous arousals. The energy is overflowing without a container, seeking release in any form available. This phase is dangerous because the man might mistake this surge of energy as a sign of failure, or worse, that retention is harming him. But nothing could be further from the truth. What's really happening is an alchemical opportunity. He is standing at a crossroads. Either master the mind and redirect the energy upward, or fall back into habitual loops that promise comfort but deliver emptiness. Here, the role of clarity becomes vital. The man must cultivate clarity of purpose. If he retains without a clear why, he becomes a bottle of shaking pressure. But when he retains with a clear intention, spiritual awakening, deeper love, creative excellence, the energy flows in service of that goal. Desire in this light is not the enemy. Misguided desire is. When desire is aligned with a higher aim, it becomes devotion. So the intensity of temptation is not a weakness. It's an overflow of raw power. A man must transmute, not suppress. He must redirect, not fight. He must channel, not escape. Otherwise, the power he's building within becomes a source of torment rather than transformation. Spiritual magnetism in the feminine mirror. As men retain and rise spiritually, they naturally become more magnetic. This is not just a poetic statement, it's an observable phenomenon. Women, especially those who are intuitive or energetically sensitive, start to notice something in these men. It's a silent aura, an unseen presence that radiates calm, purpose, and potency. And this begins to attract the feminine in all her forms. But attraction is a double-edged sword. Along with genuine interest from aligned souls, comes temptation from unhealed feminine archetypes, those that seek energy, not intimacy. These are tests in disguise. They appear as sexual chemistry, flirty encounters, or seemingly harmless digital content that just shows up in your feed. But beneath them lies the same inquiry. Will you leak your energy, or will you hold your center? The retained man must realize that women are not the problem. Lust is not the problem. The projection of desire onto external forms, that's the trap. The feminine presence is a mirror. If he sees her as an object, he will be pulled back into lower vibrations. But if he sees her as a symbol, a reminder of the divine, a carrier of Shakti energy, he will remain in power and grace. Temptation is often the feminine testing the masculine. Can you see me beyond the body? Can you feel my energy without needing to possess it? These are spiritual questions, not romantic ones. Every interaction becomes a chance to rise or regress. The woman doesn't even have to be aware of this dynamic. It's the subtle dance between Shiva and Shakti playing out in the modern world. Thus, the retained man must bless the feminine, not blame her. She is not the source of his temptation. She is the spark revealing his remaining shadows. When he can meet her with presence, without attachment, without agenda, he becomes invincible. That's when spiritual retention becomes not just discipline, but divinity in motion. The psychological rebellion of the ego. The ego thrives in familiarity. It is built on routines, emotional habits, and predictable dopamine loops. Semen retention is a direct threat to this structure. When a man stops releasing, he's not just abstaining, he's dismantling an ego identity tied to pleasure, validation, and emotional escape. And the ego does not go down without a fight. Temptation is often the ego's final weapon. It whispers, it dramatizes, it glorifies past experiences. It says, "One time won't hurt," or "This is natural, don't resist." These are not just thoughts. They're energetic hooks designed to sabotage evolution. The ego wants the man back in the cage of predictability, where there's no risk, no awakening, and no truth. The retained man must recognize that he is not fighting desire. He is outgrowing it. He is not avoiding pleasure. He is transforming it. The temptation that arises is not a call to indulge, but a signal of ego death. Every moment he says no, every time he resists the urge to escape into lust, a layer of ego falls away. And behind it lies something extraordinary: clarity, peace, purpose. Yet this battle is not won once. It is won daily. The ego will reinvent temptation in new forms: emotional hunger, romantic fantasy, fear of loneliness. It will even mask itself in spiritual justification. This is part of balance. You're being too rigid. The retained man must remain rooted in his inner compass. He must learn to differentiate between the true self and the voice of the ego. Meditation, journaling, nature, and solitude are his weapons in this war. In the end, the ego is not evil. It is simply afraid of its own irrelevance. The retained man does not need to destroy the ego. He needs to mature it, to make it a servant of the soul, not a dictator of the senses. Only then can he walk through temptation with eyes open and spirit unshaken. The alchemy of integration and transcendence. The ultimate goal of semen retention is not just celibacy, it is integration. It is the transformation of raw instinct into divine intuition. The journey is not about suppression, but sublimation, not rejection, but reorientation. A man who retains must eventually reach a state where temptation loses its hold, not because it disappears, but because he has transcended the need for external fulfillment. This stage is called alchemy. The same energy that once dragged him down now lifts him up. His urges become fuel for creativity, devotion, innovation, and insight. His sexual energy is no longer a burden. It's his compass. When temptation arises, he thanks it, observes it, and transforms it into art, service, or meditation. That is real power. But this level requires inner stillness. And inner stillness comes from daily practice. Breathwork, body awareness, spiritual reading, mindful eating, and disciplined routines. Retention without spiritual discipline leads to pressure. But retention with spiritual integration leads to awakening. It's the difference between storing fire in a sealed jar and using it to cook a sacred meal. Moreover, the retained man begins to embody divine masculinity, not the egoic version based on control or conquest, but the awakened masculine rooted in love, presence, and higher responsibility. His interactions with the feminine are elevated. His goals become aligned with service. His aura becomes healing, not just magnetic. That is when temptation bows to transformation. In the end, men who retain will face more temptation, but not as punishment. It's because they are holding more light, and light always attracts shadows. But the journey of semen retention and spirituality is about becoming the lamp that burns steadily, undisturbed by wind, undistracted by the dark. Temptation is the test. Transformation is the reward. The memory of the body and cellular imprints. The body does not forget. Even when the mind makes a firm decision to walk a new path, the body holds memories of every previous experience, especially those connected to pleasure, climax, and emotional intensity. These cellular memories are like grooves etched into the nervous system. When a man starts semen retention, his conscious decision disrupts these grooves, and the body begins to replay the stored sensations, often as physical cravings or arousals. Temptation in this phase arises as a physiological echo. It's not that the man desires a specific act. It's that his body is trying to restore its previous state of normalcy. What was once frequent has now become forbidden, and the body doesn't yet understand why. The first few weeks or months of retention can feel like wrestling with a ghost, the ghost of old patterns encoded in muscle, breath, and hormone. Understanding this body memory dynamic is crucial. The retained man must treat his body with compassion, not resistance. Stretching, fasting, yoga, somatic meditation. These practices help release stored emotional and sexual trauma. The idea is not to suppress urges, but to reprogram the nervous system to find safety in stillness, not stimulation. Healing the body's memory is part of the spiritual path. Temptation will sometimes feel like a force beyond your control, almost primal. That's because it is primal. These energies stem from survival programming, from lifetimes of conditioning. But what makes a man spiritual is his awareness of these forces without being enslaved by them. He can witness the craving and say, "I see you, but I am not you." Ultimately, when a man honors his body while also guiding it toward higher truths, temptation transforms into trust. The body begins to serve the soul, and in that alignment, the internal struggle begins to dissolve. Retention then becomes not a battle, but a conversation between the old self and the emerging self. Karma, lust, and spiritual accountability. In the spiritual journey, semen retention is not only a physical or mental discipline, it is karmic. Every act of lust, every fantasy, every indulgence leaves a karmic impression. When a man chooses retention, he is also inviting the cleansing of past karma. Temptation often reappears as these old karmic seeds sprouting back into consciousness, demanding acknowledgement, healing, or closure. This is why, on retention, a man might experience sudden flashbacks of old relationships, unresolved feelings, or intense fantasies. These are not random. They are karmic knots being untied. The temptation doesn't arise just to seduce. It arises to reveal what still holds the man captive. Retention is like turning on a spotlight in the subconscious mind. The more a man ascends, the more responsibility he must take, not just for his actions, but for his thoughts, his subtle intentions, his energetic impact. Spiritual accountability means realizing that every time we objectify, fantasize, or indulge in lower thoughts, we are feeding karma. Retention sharpens this awareness. It creates a space where the man can pause and ask, "Is this action moving me closer to freedom or further into bondage?" Temptation, then, is a form of karmic feedback. It says, this is where you once gave your power away. Do you still want to? If a man can hold his center during these moments, the karma dissolves. But if he falls, the lesson will repeat, maybe softer, maybe louder. The universe does not punish, but it always mirrors. Over time, the retained man becomes a karmic alchemist. He burns through old desires, not by force, but by understanding. His temptations become teachings. And from this higher vantage point, he doesn't just escape lust. He liberates himself from the cycle of action and reaction. That is true spiritual evolution. Retention as an invitation to soul evolution. Semen retention is not about control. It is about consciousness. When a man retains, he is saying to the universe, I am ready to evolve. I am ready to meet myself. And with that readiness comes a sacred invitation, one that will challenge every illusion he holds about sex, love, power, and identity. Temptation becomes the fire that forges this deeper self. Every moment of lust, every fleeting desire, becomes a portal into soul work. The man begins to ask deeper questions. Why do I want this? What am I really craving? Connection, escape, affirmation, and what wound is underneath that craving? Retention, therefore, is not just spiritual, it is therapeutic. It takes a man inward, into the very architecture of his pain, shame, hope, and longing. This is why temptation is more intense on this path. Because the man is no longer numbing, he is no longer leaking, he is present, he is awake. The more awake he becomes, the more he sees the subtle dynamics of temptation, not just as external seduction, but as internal fragmentation. The temptations are fragments of himself, asking to be witnessed and loved. As the soul evolves, the man begins to experience temptation differently. It no longer triggers anxiety or guilt. It becomes a signal, an indicator that something is surfacing for integration. He welcomes the temptation, not to act on it, but to learn from it. He stands firm, not out of fear, but out of love, for himself, for his path, for the energy that now fuels his purpose. In this light, temptation becomes grace. It is no longer a distraction from the journey. It is the journey. And through it, the man evolves not just as a seeker, but as a soul reclaiming its divine essence. The hidden role of environmental influence. Most men underestimate the power of environment in fueling temptation. The digital world, consumer culture, modern relationships, even architecture, everything is built to stimulate, not to center. A man on semen retention walks through a world that is not neutral. It's hypersexualized, overly visual, and emotionally ungrounded. The external world is constantly trying to seduce the senses. Temptation becomes stronger in certain spaces. Scrolling through social media, being alone in your room, watching films, even walking past an advertisement. This isn't coincidence. It's design. Companies and systems know how to hijack attention. And when a man is retaining, his attention becomes sharper, more magnetic, and more sensitive. What once felt normal now feels overwhelming. This is why environment is not a passive backdrop. It is an energetic field. A retained man must become conscious of his settings. He must protect his space like a sacred temple. His room, his phone, his friends, his online habits. Everything must align with his highest values. Otherwise, he will always be resisting rather than redirecting. Temptation often finds its strength in subtlety. A song, a scent, a photo, a suggestive text. It doesn't take much to reignite old patterns. The solution is not fear or isolation. It's design. Designing a lifestyle that supports retention. Rising early, walking in nature, listening to soul-nourishing content, avoiding overstimulation, practicing digital discipline. In mastering the environment, the man doesn't just escape temptation, he transcends it. He creates a life that makes retention not a chore, but a joy. A way of being that feels natural, harmonious, and aligned. The world doesn't have to be an enemy. It can be transformed into a sacred playground if the man becomes its conscious architect, the sacred masculine and the final test. Every spiritual tradition speaks of the sacred masculine, the divine protector, the mindful warrior, the centered creator. Semen retention is the initiation into that archetype. But like all sacred initiations, it ends with a final test. And that test is temptation in its most powerful form. Not lust alone, but the illusion of separation. The idea that fulfillment lies out there, not within. This final test often comes after months or years of retention. Just when a man feels invincible, the ego returns with a spiritual disguise. A woman appears with irresistible chemistry. A past desire returns, now wrapped in new reasoning. A vision of success tempts him to compromise his inner compass. This is not random. It is sacred design. The man must ask, will I betray my energy for temporary pleasure? Will I trade my power for approval, for excitement, for nostalgia? Will I forget who I've become to taste who I once was? These are not easy questions. This is not an easy phase. It is the threshold between human will and divine embodiment. The sacred masculine does not reject pleasure. It elevates it. He does not hate the feminine. He honors her. He does not fear temptation. He understands it as the universe asking, are you ready to carry this power with humility? The man who passes this test does not lose desire. He becomes desire itself, free of need, full of purpose. In the end, the journey of semen retention is not about avoiding temptation. It is about transcending it, walking through the fire without being burned, seeing beauty without needing to possess it, feeling desire without becoming its servant. That is the sacred masculine awakened. That is the final reward, not freedom from temptation, but freedom through it.